Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Scottish Police Authority meeting. Jane Ryder, our Vice Chair, will step in and chair the meeting should my IT drop out. I have no apologies for the meeting. Any apologies that I'm not aware of? Thank you very much. It's a requirement, as you know, of our code of conduct that members declare any financial or other interest in connection with the business for today's meeting. Can I ask members to confirm if there are any declarations of interest? Thank you very much. Any other? Can you confirm as members that there are no other items of business other than that which is on the agenda? Thank you very much. We're going to take items 9 to 11 in private in accordance with section 20 of our standing orders. Can I just ask for your approval of that? Thank you very much. I'm going to now move on to the minute of our meeting held on the 19th of January and ask for approval or any comment on those minutes. I just take that, no change to the minute that's been circulated. Thank you very much. I ask you to approve the minute then. Thank you very much. We have a next item is rolling action log and matters arising. There are 2 actions proposed for ongoing and 1 action proposed for closure. Can I ask you for any comment, and if there are none, to approve the action log? Thank you very much. The last item at this introduction is decisions since the last authority meeting on the 19th of January, and I can confirm no decisions have been taken by correspondence since the last full authority meeting on the 19th of January 2022. Thanks very much. And I'll come on to item 3, which is my report to you, which you have in writing, and I'll take that as read. In addition, just to make this comment, since I wrote my report, the Scottish Government launched its Vision for Justice on the 8th of February, which is also subject to a parliamentary debate. And I warmly welcome this vision, which is ambitious, victim-focused and cross-sector. It has a large range of activities which are relevant to us and to Police Service of Scotland. And I look forward to hearing more about the work under that Vision for Justice within our coming meetings over this year. So apart from that, I have nothing to add to my report. Are there any questions from any members about my report? Thank you very much. And welcome, Fiona McQueen. You came slightly late and you came after the declarations of interest item. Fiona, do you have any declarations?
Yes, I do, and apologies for my IT problems, Chair. So I'm Vice Chair of the Drugs Death Task Force, so I would declare an interest if we were to be having any conversations about Police Scotland and naloxone.
Thank you very much.
Or related issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So I was just asking any comments, questions about my report to you. Thank you very much. If there are none, I'm going to come to item 4, which is the committee chairs reports. And as you know, we have these reports that start to ask the committee chairs to just report briefly and in writing and verbally about their work of their committee since we last met or they last reported. So I'm going to take it in the order I have it in front of me. The first is Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, and I'll ask Jane Ryder, the chair, to introduce and comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. A very positive meeting. I think you see that there has been considerable progress in meeting recommendations from internal audit, from HMICS, and I think the committee were very satisfied with that progress. In the normal way of things, we had internal audit reports. We considered those in detail, including the management actions, which we were satisfied with. Had some discussion around whistleblowing, and because there are so relatively few across both Police Scotland and the SPA, we just wanted to probe still some more to ensure that we were satisfied that staff really have the confidence and look for some more evidence of the staff confidence in using whistleblowing where that is appropriate. Good to see an SPA, information management strategy, which we warmly commended. A very good, and as you can imagine, in private, detailed update on cybersecurity, and consideration of the internal audit plan, which comes to the board as a separate agenda item and which the committee commend.
Thank you, Jane. Very much welcome that note about the HMICS's thematic inspection, to all the recommendations, which are our responsibility, have been fully discharged by the HMICS. Just confirm that, and thank you very much for all the work that's involved in that. Any questions to the Chair of Audit? Okay, thank you very much. I next come to Legal Committee, Chair Paul Eadie. Paul.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, the Legal Committee met recently, and we, amongst the topics that we discussed, we got updates on Operation Iona, which was the operation relating to the Rangers Football Club cases, and also Operation Tarn, which relates to the Shaka Bayou case and the inquiry into that, which is about to commence. The principal discussion was around ill health, retirement and injury on duty awards, and the amount of time it's taking to get through that, which is not really satisfactory. I understand the problem is difficulty in getting people with the right medical expertise, and it's not something that's confined to us. I think a lot of public bodies are in the same position, but that's not really much consolation to the officers and the staff members that are waiting to get some certainty about their futures, or to us. So we've been progressing that, and hopefully we'll get some movement on that. So that's it, really.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions to members? Just a question from me, Paul. What resolution do you think might be in train for that problem of medical shortage of medical experts?
I think it's something we're discussing with the contractor that does that, but I think there is a national shortage of those. I know there's a lot of different pension funds are. There's a long queue of people backed up trying to get medical assessments.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm sure you'll keep the board informed of the progress on that. Thank you. Forensic Services Committee, Tom Halpin's the chair. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. You see from my report there was a significant body of work going through the committee at this time. The points that I would highlight of particular significance to us is the amount of work going to transition the post-mortem toxicology facilities from the current provider into forensic services. I'm glad to say that we've had reassurances regarding that being on track. The other area is the significant staff consultation ongoing just now in forensic services as we transition to a new operating model. It's entirely intended to improve services and in fact represents a significant investment in forensic services. And the final area was during that period public interest in potential for backlogs in toxicology impacted in significant issues, for instance, allegations of spiking, and we explored that with the forensic services leadership team, who assured us it's actually more about the complexity of the science involved in doing that work, and in fact it's not about a backlog, but recognising that that does take some weeks and indeed some months at times to get to the bottom of that analysis. But I'm sure the Director of Forensic Services later in the meeting can discuss that in greater detail, but my report is before you today.
Thank you very much, Tom, and for the work of the committee. Any questions from members? As the chair of the committee said, our Director of Forensic Services is giving her report later, so we can pick up some of the detail in that if you'd like to. If there are no questions to the chair, the final report is from Resources Committee, and I ask Grant McRae, the chair of Resources, to give his report to us.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the items on the report are actually on our agenda today, but I'd just like to highlight two things. One is there was extensive discussion on the Q3 financial monitoring report and the projection through to the year end, both from the perspective of revenue, capital and reform. And we'll be hearing more about the activities and developments that have happened since our meeting later on the agenda. The other item I particularly want to touch on is the transformational programme benefits tracking, just to reinforce the fact that we've been having quite a lot of discussion with Police Scotland about how to track the benefits being obtained and how these are going to be reported. They are introducing a new form of reporting for next financial year, but we were focusing our attention on what has been achieved to date, including and up to the end of the current financial year, and the way in which that is going to be reported in this year's annual report and accounts. These are the only things I particularly wanted to mention. Everything else is going to come up on our agenda later on today, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Grant. Any questions to Grant? On that benefits tracking then, Grant, will we discuss that in terms of the annual report when it's ready? Will we discuss that issue about what that data looks like? And
oh yes, indeed, that is very much the intention, and the reason for having aired it several months ago and keep airing it is so that we can actually have a meaningful way of actually demonstrating to all our stakeholders who will be reading the annual report and accounts just exactly what has been the significant amount that has been achieved to date and the way in which it's going to be measured going forward.
Just for those who don't follow this like you do, Grant, can you just give us a brief synopsis of what benefits tracking means? What benefits, what you're talking about there? Anyway, just tell me what.
Yes, certainly. For every significant programme, there is a business case presented to resources, which actually says what's going to be done, what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and what perceived benefits are going to emerge once this is all put in place. So the tracking is to see how the actual benefits achieved and being delivered compare with what was forecast. They'll never be exactly the same, because at the business case stage is very much an estimate, but actually being able to demonstrate that there's been considerable investment in all sorts of different projects and programmes, and it's important that we as a board and the public at large, the citizens of Scotland, understand the significant benefits that are being delivered as a result of that investment.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thanks very much indeed. And we'll come to that and when we discuss the annual report then. Before I just move on, just to give those who watch this greater insight into the performance of Police Scotland at board level, I've agreed with the Chair of Performance Committee, Michelle Miller, that the full executive summary of each quarter's performance report, will be attached to her report at board level, and that will take place at the first board meeting after the next Policing Performance Committee. So essentially, they are very interesting read, the executive summary, under the name of the Assistant Chief Constable Fiona Taylor. It is very important that the board, I'm sure you'll all read it, but we have give that visibility. So that will happen from the next meeting after the PCC. So thank you for that, chairs. Thank you very much. We come to agenda item 5, and welcome to the Chief Constable. And I'd like to invite you to speak to your report, Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you. Good morning, members. Good morning, everyone. Operational competence, professional expertise are core to the public value that Police Scotland provides to communities right across the whole of this country, in my view. And my written report this morning outlines a number of highly complex and challenging investigations which have resulted in significant convictions, significant sentences, and arrests through executive action during the past month of February and the reporting period. What I want to do this morning is briefly highlight some of that exceptional work, that exceptional police work that's been undertaken, because I do think it's important that there is that broader public awareness of the effects that the Single National Service can have in all our communities of this country. On Wednesday, 9th February, 4 men were found guilty of the planned murder and execution of Kenny Riley, and they were given life sentences with minimum prison terms ranging from 22 to 26 years. Mr. Riley was a 29-year-old man, and he was shot in the head while sitting in the passenger seat of a car in the Maryhill area of Glasgow in April 2018, almost 4 years ago. And a lengthy, extremely lengthy and complex inquiry was undertaken by officers within Police Scotland, led by detective officers but supported by local divisional officers in Glasgow, utilising numerous investigative and forensic capabilities, and that resulted in the significant court outcome that I previously outlined. Now, the response of Police Scotland, in my view, sends a clear message to those who use firearms to commit violence that it will not be tolerated. People responsible will be brought to justice and they will be held to account. A week later from that conviction, on 16th of February, a 35-year-old male, Nikolaos Kavounakis, a Greek national, was sentenced to over 8 years imprisonment under Section 57 of the Terrorism Act after he left an IED, an improvised explosive device, in Princes Street Gardens, Edinburgh, in January 2018, again 4 years ago. His sentence followed this 4-year investigation by the counter-terrorism team within Police Scotland, during which they worked with colleagues and agencies right across the United Kingdom and Europe. Now, thankfully, it's important for me to reiterate that terror offending remains rare in Scotland, and at this time, there is nothing to suggest any specific threat to Scotland. But we, as a service, are eternally vigilant, and we look to continue the support we get from the people of Scotland in that regard. Now, our structure as a single national service allows us to work locally, nationally and internationally with partners to respond to such major incidents and serious criminality. This was evident once again at the early part of this month, on Friday 4th February, when two men, 56 and 28 years old, who had been wanted by Police Scotland for a period of time, were arrested in Amsterdam by our colleagues in the Dutch National Police. The executive action followed a lengthy investigation that Police Scotland led with the support from the National Crime Agency and many other international partners into serious and organised crime that has an impact not only in Scotland but beyond. Both these men will now be subject to extradition proceedings. Now, as Chief Constable, when I seek to further develop the capability and effectiveness of policing across Scotland, I believe, I know that our structure and professional competence ensures that we are able to respond to complex and challenging demands, whether that is serious and organised crime, terrorism, the criminal use of firearms, indeed any other threat to communities and individuals. And I'm absolutely convinced that the people of Scotland are safer today because our policing model operates as a national service, and that the policing service that in itself enables and provides. Chair, I know that the terrible toll of drugs deaths in Scotland is a concern for us all, and we've already heard from Professor Fiona McQueen and her critical leadership role in terms of the drugs deaths task force. Policing in Scotland is absolutely committed to playing our part to reduce the harm caused to individuals, families and communities. You'll see from my report that I detail the conviction of 4 men who were sentenced to over 20 years imprisonment for the supply of controlled drugs worth £10 million, linked again to serious and organised crime. My report also outlines executive action taken across the north, east and west of the country, resulting in a number of arrests and again seizure of significant quantities of illicit drugs. Now, the convictions, the seizures, the disruptions demonstrate our ongoing commitment to preventing drugs reaching our streets and to bring those engaged in serious and organised crime to justice. Now, at the same time, our police purpose and our police remit in Scotland goes beyond our crucial law enforcement role. We've seen that through the pandemic. Policing is far greater than law enforcement. Law enforcement is critical. It's critical to legitimacy. It's critical to effectiveness. It's critical to bringing justice often to the most vulnerable of our communities. But actually, the policing role goes beyond law enforcement. The preservation of life, keeping people safe, lies right at the heart of policing in Scotland. We have a positive legal and moral duty to improve the lives of our fellow citizens and our communities. In this regard, following a successful and rigorous test of change, I decided recently that all operational officers should be trained and equipped to carry naloxone nasal spray. Naloxone is a life-saving drug which can be given safely to those who suffer the effects of an opioid overdose. We had been piloting the carriage and use by officers of the nasal spray in different parts of Scotland: Dundee, Falkirk, Glasgow, Stirling, and the Caithness area in N Division. And it has been used on over 60 occasions to provide life-saving first aid to people who otherwise might have died. The test of change was led by Assistant Chief Constable Gary Ritchie and has been progressed through our naloxone delivery steering group, upon which a wide group of stakeholders and key partners were represented, including indeed the Scottish Police Authority, the Scottish Police Federation and other staff associations, as well as the Inspectorate, PIRC and our colleagues in the Scottish Ambulance Service. This steering group enabled robust debate and oversight and partnership working to take place. I'm extremely grateful to everyone who's made the contribution to executing the pilot and, in my mind, what turned out to be a successful pilot. The test of change was subject to a period of independent, rigorous academic evaluation, and that evaluation recommended a national rollout and also reported strong support amongst officers who had been trained and equipped with naloxone. I was fortunate to meet one of my colleagues, one of the officers who had been piloting the use of naloxone last week. In his experience, he's used the spray on 2 occasions, and he described the effect as near to miraculous. Policing, as we know, is so often the service of first and last resort. It's a service that's first on the scene. It's a service which responds to crisis, chaos and criticality. For a person suffering an overdose, what naloxone nasal spray does is that allows it to be administered safely by officers with no adverse effects and hopefully save that person's life. Of course, it's absolutely essential that where naloxone is used by an officer to help someone in crisis, that professional medical attention continues to be provided from our ambulance service colleagues and others. And in addition, crucially, it's vital that timely and sustainable support and interventions are available to provide treatment for those suffering addiction and wider support for them and their families. We are now within Police Scotland in the process of securing sufficient stock of the nasal spray, as well as providing training for the national rollout, and I undertake to continue to keep the authority updated as matters progress. But in my role as Chief Constable, I am now convinced that the carriage of naloxone by our officers can make a significant contribution to improving the lives and the well-being of the communities of Scotland. We're doing it within Police Scotland because it saves lives, and we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. As I have consistently underlined, and in fact mentioned earlier on, the valuable contribution officers and staff within the Police Service of Scotland make to improve the well-being of our communities has been continuously demonstrated during the pandemic. We all know it's been an unprecedented time, and it continues to present difficult challenges for everyone, notwithstanding some positive signs that we're beginning to move away from the critical period of the pandemic. Members will recall, I hope, that I reported on necessary action that the service had taken before and over the festive period to maintain effective capability and capacity within policing for our communities, and also to safeguard our own people as the Omicron variant became more prevalent. And of course, at that time, the impact of Omicron was then unknown, and absences did indeed reach extremely high levels. Now, the measures that we as a service took included the deployment of officers from specialist functions to return to community local policing roles, included the pausing of non-essential training, and also included the deployment of probationary constables who had yet to complete their initial training, and they were deployed under appropriate supervision to support local policing divisions. Now, although absences do remain high, they are less than the critical period in the early part of 2022, and they have eased since that time. And accordingly, those probationary constables, which are almost 250 in number, will return to headquarters here at Tillyalan to complete their initial training next week, commencing Monday 28th February. These necessary and important measures for coronavirus and the impact that we've previously outlined of COP26 on recruitment and training and availability of training facilities mean that there has been a longer period between intakes than would normally be the case. Inevitably, this has implications for officer numbers over this COVID and COP26 period. We are required to report officer numbers on a quarterly basis, and in December of 2021, the full-time equivalent number of officers was 17,117. Now, that is some 115 officers fewer than when we reported in the previous quarter of September 2021. With natural retirements and attrition, our overall number of officers will indeed reduce further when the statistics are next reported in April. And I think it's important that I am very clear on this matter. Now, some context around that 115 officers. 115 officers is actually less than 1% of our overall establishment and capacity. And we are able, as a service, to flex resources to ensure effective policing is maintained for communities over this transitional period as we work to return to full strength. We have adjusted our recruitment for the coming months to ensure that we return to a full officer establishment later in 2022. And as part of this, I very much look forward to welcoming around 300 new probationary constables into the service in mid-April. The welcoming new probationary constables during their oath of office ceremony is a very important opportunity and duty for me as Chief Constable to thank them for stepping forward to serve the public, and also to underline my expectations of them, that they will demonstrate the public service values which unite our diverse workforce, drawn from the different backgrounds and experiences of the communities we serve. To better reflect, to better represent, to better serve all our communities, it's vital that we build a service where everyone feels truly welcomed, and that they as individuals are able to thrive, to flourish, and truly be their authentic selves. In this regard, it is very important that Police Scotland and the Scottish LGBTI Police Association are celebrating LGBT History Month during February through a whole series of events. I've consistently stated that our officers and staff and their shared purpose to keep people safe is the key to the success of policing now and in the future. I'm very grateful to valued staff associations such as the Scottish LGBTI Police Association and many others for their continued challenge, their continued support as we strive to improve the experiences of all our communities, which includes the officers and staff that work in policing in Scotland. Chair, I'll close by just reminding colleagues that we will welcome 3 new Assistant Chief Constables into Police Scotland following the appointment by the authority last month, which you, Chair, and Fiona McQueen and myself were all involved in. Emma Bond and Andy Freeburn joined from the Police Service of Northern Ireland, while Beck Smith joins from the National Crime Agency. Assistant Chief Constable Smith will lead the major crime, public protection and local crime portfolio. ACC Freeburn will lead organised crime, counter-terrorism and intelligence, and ACC Bond will join the local policing command team. The officers are all highly experienced and are very committed to serving in Scotland, and I'm pleased to say that they are joining a stable leadership team, a stable organisation that's focused on public service with a shared mission to keep people safe. Chair, I'll pause there, and as always, myself and all 4 of my deputies are available to respond to any questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Before I open it up to members, and put your hand up if you can, members, and I'll bring you in the order you put your hands up. Just want to make a couple of comments, or one comment really, about your report, which is about naloxone. That in 2014, the World Health Organization published a very impressive evidence-based study on preventing drug deaths. At the time, they estimated around about 70,000 people around the world died each year from opioid overdose. And they recommended that those likely to witness an opioid overdose should have access to naloxone and be instructed in its administration. And now, just 8 years after that then radical recommendation from the World Health Organization on the availability of naloxone to the non-medical community, and that was a big issue they made, we hear that from the Chief Constable of Police Scotland of his commitment to lead the first police service in the UK to add naloxone to the first aid kit of all relevant officers. From a recommendation to a test of change, to evaluation, to a commitment in 8 years is a remarkable achievement. And I am very grateful for all the officers who devised, led the programme, those who undertook the evaluation, trained the volunteers, and most of all to those volunteers themselves for being part of this test of change. I'm sure we'll discuss this at greater length and more detail in other forums, and we'll discuss some of your announcement today, Chief Constable, but just to emphasise my gratitude to those who led and volunteered for that test of change. So I'm going to come through the order that hands were put up, if I can do, and I'm going to ask Katrina Stewart to ask the first question. Katrina.
Thank you. Good morning, Chief Constable. Thank you very much for your report, which, as always, I find them very clear and very informative. I was going to say that I particularly value your comments, but actually welcome all your comments. But I suppose specifically around your comments about diversity and inclusion, which, as you know, is a topic dear to all our hearts, but certainly to mine. The thing I wanted to kind of hone in on really was, as you quite rightly say in your report, the public protection element of your report covers a lot of other things in your report. So, for example, violence against women or community engagement. So I'm really interested in this public protection development programme, because this is really the first time that I think this has come to our attention, this new initiative. And I wondered if you would, I mean, this is obviously clearly something that you're taking very seriously. You've got 2 deputy chief constables, working on it, and across a broad range of services. So I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about exactly what it is, when we'll get to see sight of some more detail on it, and what's its remit, what's its scope, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just leave it to you, Chief.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Chair. Really welcome the question. We did actually mention it. I think probably maybe not given it sufficient prominence in the update we gave in regard to violence against women and girls, because clearly violence against women and girls is a major element of public protection, but public protection itself is clearly far wider and picks up many other areas. I'm going to ask DCC Malcolm Graham just to add a little bit to your question and respond to your own observations, Katrina. I would only say that the reason that I've asked 2 deputy chief constables to lead this on a joint basis is that the very phrase almost sums up the policing role. And this is not a matter of specialism, localism, national structure issues. This is actually about commitment, long-term interventions, working with partners at times to protect the most vulnerable, and through that protection to prevent greater harm coming to pass. And it pervades in the public space, in the private space, often unfortunately and brutally within family environments and domestic settings, but also it takes into some of the work that we're doing in the virtual space as well, where public protection it will have a role. So it's a crucial part of the next phase of Police Scotland going forward, and that's why, you know, Deputy Chief Constable Graham, Deputy Chief Constable Kerr, and all their considerable experience and all their teams are committed to taking this forward. But I'll ask Malcolm maybe just to put a little bit more meat on those bones, if I may.
Thank you, Chief Constable, and good morning, convener members. I'll just add a little bit in more detail. If we go back to when Police Scotland started, it was actually the Chief Constable in the role that I'm in, and myself as the Assistant Chief Constable in 2012 into 2013 that set up the original public protection structures at a national level and into local policing divisions. And the commitment has been really clear through the intervening 9 years to gradual development. We know that the challenges have changed dramatically in all the space around about that broader definition of public protection, including at its core violence against women, girls, children, but also adult support and protection, human trafficking, and other horrific crimes that we identify in smaller numbers, like female genital mutilation and some others. The way that has developed in the online world has really changed dramatically, and we have adapted and we have grown. For instance, we created a national child abuse investigation unit. We've considerably enhanced our internet investigation unit. We've considerably enhanced our capability and capacity around about protecting vulnerable children online through other means as well. But we haven't done a systemic review and then redesign of what we think we need at this point in the maturity of the organisation. And that's the ambition of the Public Protection Development Programme. It fits very closely with other change programmes, so Local Policing Improvement Programme, which the board has heard about, because some of the capabilities we'll wish to develop will of course need to remain local at the point of response and in the community level. Some will need to remain national in terms of specialist capability that, you know, as the Chief Constable outlined in his opening remarks, Police Scotland is very well placed to deliver where that is required. But we also think that the interface between the local and national perhaps needs a different level of capability, and one which we can now start to consider, design and introduce. But that's a substantial undertaking. It needs a programmatic approach. That we know there are some more urgent things we need to do, but some of this is about longer term investment in these challenging areas. And as the Chief Constable said, you know, this is about all of operational policing with the whole of the organisation in support behind it. So we're setting out some funding for the years ahead from the reform allocation, which is exactly what it should be used for. We're going through the discovery phase at the moment in terms of understanding the current landscape. We'll then define and develop what the future model looks like, and we'll deliver that. And I would really welcome bringing back, I think we discussed it briefly at the previous session in January, bringing back a more comprehensive update on public protection, and the Public Protection Development Programme would be a key part of that later in this year, I hope.
Thank you very much for that. Krishina, you still got your hand up? You want to follow that through? Or?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much for that response. I really welcome, really value that you're taking such a systematic and long-term and kind of broad, you know, all-inclusive approach to this. I think it's a great move. I really look forward to seeing more detail as you go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katrina. I don't know if DCC Kerr wants to add to that as a co-leader of this, or want me to move on? I'll just open up to you, DCC Kerr.
No, nothing to add. Thank you. I think Malcolm's covered it very well. Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is from Mary Pitt-Casely. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, can I thank the Chief Constable?
Mary, you've gone on to mute.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to thank the Chief Constable for his comments this morning on the use of naloxone, and also echo your comments, Chair, on the value of the officers who have volunteered to be part of the trial. I think it's fair to say that the national rollout of naloxone has been very widely welcomed since it was announced last week. However, we see from the Chief Constable's report that there were some officers involved in the trial who were reluctant to use the drug, substance. And I think we can also see from the academic review that there may be others who still have concerns regarding potential risks, including legal risks. Now, I know that the service will continue to try to address any concerns and to mitigate and minimise any risks. But, Chair, and perhaps it's a matter for yourself, I wondered whether the People Committee might usefully be asked to look at the implementation of the rollout of naloxone in terms of any impact on officers and their well-being.
Thank you, Mary. I mean, in my view, it's a technology, or albeit a chemical technology, and part of that should be through the Policing Performance Committee under our MOU. I'm sure it will go through there. But I think that particular concern you raised should be looked at by your committee, if your committee has the capacity to do that, and essentially to look at the issues you raised and the mitigations that may be available. So I think I would ask both committees to have a look at this, bearing in mind, quite rightly, the decision's been made on the basis of evidence by the Chief Constable, and we've heard that and supported it. So I would say yes, Mary, unless Chief Constable, you have anything else to add to that?
Just a couple of comments. I really welcome that suggestion from Mary. And again, I think there is locus for both committees. I think a couple of observations just on reservations of some officers. I know, we all know, I think, that the Scottish Police Federation had reservations regarding the issue and use of naloxone. I've got to say that I had such reservations. If I went back a number of years ago, I had a number of reservations about whether police officers should be issued with and carry and use naloxone. And a number of those reservations were similar to the ones that some officers still have. And that was, firstly, is this yet another instance of policing stepping forward into a space that actually other services should be there? And would this see a reduction from support from the ambulance service? Is this an area that you would be exposed to liability? Would the Crown, would the PIRC take a particular interest and concern? And that's why we took, I think, a very prudent approach to the test of change. This was a genuine test. I said I shared a number of those reservations, but what the test has shown, what the evidence has shown, and it's been evaluated, is that actually those concerns have, if not been fully eliminated, they certainly have been diminished. We've had full support from the ambulance service. I alluded to that. Everybody recognises that that's an emergency intervention. It's not necessarily the longer term solution, and the involvement of the Crown, the PIRC, the authority and others, I think, has provided that support. And again, we asked for an entirely independent academic evaluation to come in and carry out the assessment. And then based on that evidence and the discussion I had with colleagues, we took the decision to issue naloxone because we do think it's the right thing to do. But a number of years ago, I understood those reservations, and at those times as well, it was syringe administration, which again always caused concern, where I think the development of the nasal spray and the pilot work, I think, has shown it absolutely is the right thing to do. But exactly as Mary suggests, we will keep it under constant monitoring. We'll continue to work with officers and staff. We'll continue to work with the Scottish Police Federation as we take this forward as a collective. But the reservations were legitimate ones. I shared them at a period of time. But I think from the evidence of the test of change, it is now the right thing to do to issue naloxone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that commitment, Chief Constable, and look forward to any comments from you, Mary, and from Michelle Miller on naloxone and your committee's review. Thank you very much. The next question I have is from Fiona McQueen. Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. And I can't resist a comment about naloxone, but my question actually is about the strategic engagement with Public Health Scotland on mental health. So I think that it's interesting in your report, Chief Constable, to see two sides of the same coin, all about relentless pursuit to make Scotland a safer and better place through Police Scotland officials. So in terms of that relentless pursuit to reduce harm, and the drug seizures that you've reported here today to reduce supply has to be welcomed. We've rehearsed the potentially life-saving administration of naloxone, and as you rightly say, it's about the emergency response. It's not about substituting for other healthcare practitioners. But I think for me, the striking thing is it's not just about the potentially life-saving response of naloxone. It's actually for people at the most vulnerable stage of their life, police officers reaching out with empathy and compassion. And I think that is probably as striking as the potentially life-saving intervention. And at times, people who do use substances struggle to have strangers treating them with empathy and compassion. And I think Police Scotland absolutely has to be commended in that beacon of public health leadership right across the country. So thank you for that. I'm interested if either you or one of your team, Chief, could say a bit more about the work with NHS 24 and the mental health piece. Again, in my previous lives, I have noted the intervention of police officers supporting people with mental health, and actually the empathy and compassion and support that police officers have shown have sometimes been completely favourably compared to other agencies who have been able to reach out, and the response from police officers, I think, has been highly commendable, and at times showing other agencies just how people in mental health distress should be treated. So I wonder if either you or some of your team could say a bit more. I'm interested in user feedback. So we've heard a lot, and I can absolutely understand the relief of police officers being able to have access to a mental health practitioner to help and guide them. But I'm interested in user feedback about how they have, because they've been distressed enough to need police intervention. Some of the outcomes have said, well, next day GP. So I'm just thoughtful. That seems quite a dramatic change from needing emergency police intervention, as you say, often first and last resort. And so I'm interested in user feedback, but also if police officers feel there are other responses that could also be appropriate that would help them, perhaps from the health team.
Thank you, Fiona. Very grateful for your comments and your observations, again, just for your considerable experience in this field. I will ask Deputy Chief Constable Will Kerr to respond in more detail to your queries regarding mental health and the engagement with Public Health Scotland. The only thing I would say by way of introduction is to commend Will, actually, and his team for the leadership work we've been doing with Public Health Scotland. As you and colleagues will be aware, a relatively young organisation, so there are some organisational learning that they can take from the birth and creation of Police Scotland. I do think, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, that if you look at core public services and reform of public services and change, actually there's an awful lot of learning that Police Scotland can provide to others. And in that organisational way, and some of these are cultural and some of these are clearly of a more technical nature, but I do think it's really important for the Scottish Government and others that they look to Police Scotland and take the lessons and the learning when they look to reform other parts of the public sector. And in terms of the relationship with Public Health Scotland, that's exactly what Will's done, along with Angela Leach, the Chief Executive. So I'm extremely supportive and really commend that innovative work and the partnership work that's there. But I'll ask Will to add a little bit more to that collaborative arrangement we have, and specifically on the mental health issues that you raise. Will?
Thanks very much, Chief. Thanks, Fiona. It's a really timely question as well. I mean, mental health-based demand, as you know, is a massively growing area of demand for policing, particularly out of hours, where very often there's no other service available. And as you say, having a public service that's available out of hours with an open door to be able to treat somebody who's in distress with the empathy and compassion that you talked about earlier on is incredibly important. Can I give you a wee bit of history about the mental health pathway that you raised? And I would value I'd be very keen to have a more detailed discussion with the board off table about this. I mean, essentially, the genesis of this goes right back to 2017, when there was a collaborative working group set up between the Scottish Ambulance Service, NHS 24 and Police Scotland. The whole aim is about making sure better response to instances of mental ill health, and that they get the most appropriate and professional earliest response, rather than waiting right to the end of that linear line and needing a clinical intervention when perhaps that may not have been needed earlier on, and you'll know far more about this than we do. So over the next couple of years, that proposal actually developed. The Scottish Government Health and Justice Collaboration Improvement Board actually put some funding into this. What was agreed was NHS 24 would set up a mental health hub. There was a test of change for the mental health hub, where essentially Scottish Ambulance Service and Police Scotland could refer calls from individuals suffering mental ill health into this mental health hub. It ran, it kicked off essentially in March 2019, and then from July 2020 it went 24/7. And we have an early evaluation of that, which I'm very happy to share with board members. And interestingly, just when you raised earlier on the point about trying to stay out of emergency interventions, of the 777 referrals to the NHS 24 Mental Health Hub between August 2020 and February 21, 93% of those referrals had a non-emergency outcome endpoint. So, either self-care, GP telephone triage, distress brief intervention. That's massively important. We then developed that work since. There was additional funding that came from the Health and Justice Collaboration Board, another £450,000, which meant that we are now at the end stage of recruiting 5 mental health and nursing practitioners to actually work in our contact management centres. They're going to work one on each team, and the resolution team and our C3 division at Govan. And the planned go live date for that, we've recruited the 5 mental health and nursing practitioners. They've been through the vetting process. All of this was slowed down during the pandemic, as you would expect, but we hope to go live with their involvement and role in Govan probably mid to late March. Again, we'll run it through a pilot in the west of the country before we expand it to the north and the east of the country as well. So that's massively important. And the chair and I had a conversation last week with both the Chief Executive and Chair of Public Health Scotland on the collaboration framework that we've been developing over the last couple of years. And again, as you know better than us, a key part of this work about getting the earliest possible practical intervention, particularly with children and young people, is that so you don't end up over medicalising the problem of mental health in children and young people, that actually there's earlier what might just be psychosocial interventions that could be taken at a far earlier stage. And actually, particularly when people are in distress or vulnerable, very often the first point of contact is going to be with the police service. So making sure that we have the best sort of advice available to us is actually critical. So that the work, the mental health pathway and hub is going to be used as a basis for an extension of our work with Public Health Scotland. We're going to use the collaboration framework to expand that work and actually look to see how we can map the potential points of intervention and support for people who are undergoing mental health distress or who have underlying mental health issues, to give them far earlier, better, more professionally aligned support than is currently the case. There's an awful lot more detail in this, Fiona, but I'll stop at that point for the sake of brevity, and we're very happy to come back, send the evaluation to you and give you a more detailed update in due course.
Fiona?
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's incredibly helpful and very powerful to hear and listen to that commitment. I'm just wondering, in terms of the mental health pathway, the opportunity to examine potential points of interventions. So I think you probably are understating the importance of, or maybe you're not, of police officers. So in that 93%, clearly there's been an empathetic and compassionate response from the police officer, which will have helped that family or the individual. But I'm just wondering whether seeking that, if Police Scotland are often the only out of our services, I'm wondering whether looking at that potential point of intervention might mean that there is an ask of other services to be available out of hours to people in distress, or is it too early to say yet?
I don't think it's too early to say. Part of the work we're doing with PHS is about trying to provide police officers with the skills, the knowledge and the training to actually provide that that better support. But there are others here better placed than us to provide that longer term support and advice. Hence why we want to recruit the mental health nursing practitioners. But you're quite right to point out that whilst we might constantly say there should be no wrong door for public services, outside 9 to 5, very often the only door that's left open is a police service. So when people are at the time of greatest need, at the time of greatest distress, when they're perhaps at their most vulnerable, the only people they can get hold of is a police officer. And as the Chief said in his comments earlier on, we're comfortable with our broader role. Our role is not just enforcement. We're comfortable with our statutory role that includes both safety and well-being. And that well-being responsibility is why we have to make sure that our frontline police officers, our contact management staff, have got the skills, the ability and the knowledge to be able to make the most effective early intervention. The mental health nursing practitioners will help with that, will support that. But the work we're doing with PHS, we see as having a very significant support function for us, because it looks as if we're, it doesn't look as if we are exchanging data, we're exchanging knowledge, we're exchanging structures, we're starting to co-design some of the early triage functions that we know that we need. So that's immensely powerful work, but it's, as I say, look forward to having a more detailed discussion off table with you about it, Fiona, if that helps.
No, I think that would be helpful. Just interested in where each service responds in the first instance to someone in distress, but again, really grateful to all the work that Police Scotland are doing, and interested in watching this go forwards. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Before I come to Paul Eadie, just on that, the touchstone of the conversations about change we're having is based around evidence and evaluation. And I think that's very welcome. It's part of the MOU the Chief Constable and I signed to actually move forward change in a structured way. So taking up your offer there, DCC Kerr, I think that evaluation could be, maybe my office could arrange either an internal seminar or it to go through one of our committees just to have a look at in more detail about what that then says, because it's the basis of change, as you say, 4 new posts within C3, as I understood it. So can I leave it to our officers to kind of find a way, the most appropriate way, so we can look at this evidence? And I am very keen to constantly emphasise the evidence route that we're going down, not research evidence route, which includes police officer judgment and the lived experience. So thank you for that. I'm very interested. And as you say, we have briefly touched on this in some of our discussions before, but I'm more in depth. Look, thank you, Fiona, for raising that. My next is Paul Eadie. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm delighted about the rollout of naloxone. It makes perfect sense to me, and I think the Chief Constable, you're absolutely spot on when you say it will save lives and it's the right thing to do. The questions I've got surround the other end of the drugs coin, really the issue of supply. And I note in your report that you're reporting a number of seizures, particularly in the first few weeks of February. I think the biggest in financial terms was, I think, £450,000 worth of cannabis that was seized. Can I ask, have you or your officers noticed any emerging trends around the use of cannabis and the supply of cannabis, particularly during the pandemic period when a lot of people have been locked down for quite significant amounts of time?
Thanks, Paul. My short answer is that I haven't. I'm not aware of any, but it's an area we could look at in terms of some level of analysis or understanding. Again, with your forbearance, I'll maybe ask DCC Malcolm Graham if he had anything further on that. But from my perspective, I haven't seen any marked change in either the use or profile of cannabis use.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks for the question, Paul. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that our strategy in terms of tackling organised crime and organised crime groups focuses on the harm that drugs causes, and that's evolved over a number of years, rightly, so that we look at the public health issues that are created by crime, the economic harm, the violence that's associated with organised crime groups and how they operate. And that generally draws us towards groups who are dealing in primarily category A drugs and also increasingly into benzodiazepines and other synthetic drugs which are manufactured at huge scale either within the UK through the increasing availability of pill presses and the precursor chemicals, or at times even in Scotland. And these pills can be produced in huge numbers in a short space of time. And we know, to refer it back to the drugs death crisis that we've already touched on through different lenses this morning, that a combination of these drugs are what is at the heart of most of the deaths that we see in Scotland. Now, cannabis can feature in those profiles, but quite often it doesn't. And the seizures that we get of cannabis can still be significant, but they're quite often not associated with the same groups that are involved in some of these other commodities that are described as a priority. So in short, I am agreeing with what the Chief Constable said, that we haven't seen a change in the profile. And actually, I think if it's round about use and prevalence in communities, it's probably more likely to come through a public health route, and which I would be happy to take away and have a further look at.
Yeah, I asked the question because last week in one of the tabloids that popped up on my feed, I tripped across an article that was reporting that cigarettes had been a 7% increase in the use of cigarettes during lockdown, during the pandemic, but a 30% increase in the sale of tobacco. And I don't anticipate people are sort of shoving this into a church warden and smoking them. I would suggest that perhaps a 30% increase in tobacco is perhaps being mixed with cannabis and is being smoked in roll-ups. So hence my question. Plus also I'm noticing personally over the last 2 years, every time I go out for a walk, I smell cannabis in the street in a way that I'd never done before. And it's not just in Edinburgh. If I go to Glasgow, for example, I've noticed that as well.
Probably a question for you, DCC Graham, or an issue to respond to.
No, thank you, and it's interesting. Your sort of anecdotal evidence is one which I can't really sort of confirm or add any great clarity. It's not something I think that we're seeing coming through in any data that we are gathering, and it is something that I would be happy to take away and see if we could provide any more sort of meaningful sources of evidence around about off table.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. I suppose it just adds to the complexity that there have been recent medical articles about the relationship of use of cannabis to mental health in particularly young people. So it goes back to that conversation about the role of policing. I'm not sure there's any easy answers, certainly not an issue that can be debated at the board level, but I believe that this public protection issue can also settle on that. Also, the mental health work can settle on some of these areas. But I think what I take from these conversations, Paul, is the active engagement of policing in complex issues. And as I think Fiona put it very well, from the point of empathy and sympathy, I like that too, a user perspective, but also a public interest perspective. So I would like to come back to these general areas for discussions. It's not always to the board, but I think Police Scotland are showing us that they are touching very, very heavily into these areas. So we'll keep it an alive discussion between us. Grant McRae next, please, Grant.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. Martin Evans has already welcomed the Scottish Government Justice Division launched on the 8th of February, and I wonder if you or your team could say something about how you see the implications rolling out for Police Scotland.
Thank you, Grant. I'll ask DCC Care to add a little bit to this. DCC Care represents Police Scotland on the Justice Board that the Scottish Government convened with other key partners. So just a couple of brief comments from me is that undoubtedly an awful lot of pressure at the moment in other parts of the justice system. There have been significant inevitable delays in the court process. There's a push on for us. It means that there are a number of people, untried individuals accused of quite serious criminality at times, who are at liberty in our communities, and that means that there's a duty upon us and an involvement upon us to try to protect our communities and ensure that there is much safety as possible. There's also a demand in terms of the actual court process itself, when there is this lag in trials where victims, whether that's of domestic violence or other criminality, are not having access to that justice outcome, which can often be a major contributing factor to help their recovery as well. So there's a whole number of implications, I think, that are coming out COVID, as well as the development of the justice strategy. We will reflect it in our joint work and share of our strategic review. I think we've already mentioned that. I think I will, when I bring my annual police plan to the authority next month, I do make specific reference of that justice strategy, and we are fully engaged and aware of it with these wider justice outcomes. I think there's a lot of it is mirroring us as a service. We have been at the forefront of moving towards a more outcome-based approach to performance and to strategic planning, and therefore I do welcome the work that the justice strategy is now going to take place. So Will sits on the Justice Board and may wish to add a few brief comments in furtherance of my reflections.
Thanks, Chief. Yes, thank you, Grant, for the question. You'll be aware, as the Chief alluded to, I sit in the Justice Board for Scotland, and the focus, the transformational focus that's outlined in the justice strategy is on two clear areas. One is making sure that justice services are person-centred and trauma-informed, and secondly, making sure there's work across public services to focus on prevention and early intervention. The three priority areas, all of which have a locus for policing. Obviously, firstly, making sure justice services better meet the needs of women and children in justice, and areas of significant focus for the Justice Board. Secondly, hearing victims' voices more in the process, and thirdly, shifting that balance, which is very important and clearly introduces an enhanced role for the police in offender management within communities, is to shift the balance between use of custody and delivering community justice options. So you asked, what are the implications for policing? Well, there's a 12-month delivery plan that accompanied, only initially a 12-month delivery plan that included accompanied the justice strategy with some additional funding for Police Scotland, but it focuses for us in areas like virtual coach, virtual custodies, massively important for us actually in terms of demand modelling and demand management. The remote provision of witness evidence, again, massively important for us, not least in rural and island communities around court cases. Delivering of some of our IT infrastructure, which we're just starting to mature and evolve. So National Crime and Case Desk, the digital evidence sharing capability as we try and digitise the criminal justice system a bit more effectively. But ultimately overall, and probably I'll end on that point about the need to digitise the system, the reality is that only 4% of all witnesses cited, Police Scotland witnesses cited, actually end up giving evidence in court. 66% have given remotely when they're called. That's a massive drain of resources. So there's undoubtedly things that can be done to make sure it is not just victim focused, but a lot more efficient and effective as a system as a whole, with significant benefits for policing. So I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. Could I just say that as Chair of Resources, I'm particularly interested in how this all sort of rolls forward into future plans and how we actually are able to resource all your requirements over the coming period. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Grant. I think that's an implicit challenge to policing, to your committee. I'm sure they'll welcome that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I got Tom Halpin.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. In your report, you referenced international engagement work that's ongoing, and given the global situation just now, that work is no doubt even more important. I've got a couple of questions around that. The first one is, in light of the current world situation involving Ukraine, are there any likely resource implications immediately for Police Scotland, or that can be foreseen arising from this? So that'd be the first bit. But my question that I had initially designed around your input today was in terms of Police Scotland's work as a global citizen, and I absolutely commend this international collaboration you referred to today, which references into work with the US authorities. I know that's happening elsewhere, but really, as you look towards the international development work that Police Scotland are increasingly getting involved in, where it's about building capability and capacity in countries where our rights-based approach that we're so proud of is maybe not at the same place yet. And it's about supporting them in developing towards that. Is how, for the benefit of everyone, is we have this International Development Board that we've developed, but how do we, through that, safeguard our rights-based approach and prevent Police Scotland getting drawn into conflict in terms of that approach with regimes that perhaps are not in the same place. So there's two elements to it. One is specific as an operational implication for us just now, and the other is that broader approach that avoids conflict with their own values.
Thanks for that, Tom. And I will ask Will Kerr, who leads on our international development work, just to respond to the points you make in regard to rights. I would say that it is absolutely at the heart of our assessment. We work very closely with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. As you say, it is an opportunity for Scotland, through Police Scotland, to make that contribution as a global citizen, and the level of international interest, both in our strategic approach, our values and our operational delivery is extremely high at the moment. And I do think that's based on a couple of the factors that you've alluded to. As one of them is our broader mission, and we've talked about that a lot this morning, you know, an approach, a kind of public health approach, that policing being more than law enforcement, policing being about showing compassion and serving your fellow citizen, taking your authority from your fellow citizens. That's really important and critical in terms of policing by consent and police legitimacy, which has an international interest and focus at the moment, and we guard that and value that extremely highly. And then the second point, I think, as you rightly say, is in regard to a rights-based approach, and regardless of any potential changes to primary legislation around that, we will always take a rights-based approach to policing in Scotland, because we know that that balances the rights of communities, of individuals, of those accused of crime, of victims of crime, as well as those who seek to have their voices heard. So I think those two elements of a broader mission of policing, public health, compassionate serving of our fellow citizens, as well as our rights-based approach, does generate a lot of interest. And by definition, you know, the people that seek additional help are perhaps not in the place they want to be. So we do need to just strike that balance, as you say, about going forward to help others, to try to get them into that correct place without in the way damaging our reputation, or actually giving some regimes that don't respect democracy an appearance of legitimacy. But I think there's sufficient checks and balances that Will might outline to give you that assurance, and I do think the role of the SPA and the International Development Board will add to that. In regard to your first question, the position in the Ukraine, we, on a number of fronts, we're continuing to monitor that. There are bulletins and briefings coming from the UK counter-terrorism network in terms of any potential implications or otherwise that may come from that level of disruption in that part of the world. We also have, as you will be aware, consulates in regard to both countries. We have communities, we have nationals, both Ukrainian and Russian nationals, who study, who work, who live in Scotland. So we'll be doing a lot of community-based work as well, so that we're there to make sure that we can support different communities and continue to make sure that there is a level of community stability. And we will also clearly be looking to see what wider term implications may be, whether there's an impact on fuel supplies, on cost or cost of living, and all the implications that some of these economic pressures may have on potential demands that come into policing. So we're constantly monitoring that at a very local level and also at a national level in terms of broader assessment, but making sure we're reaching out to the communities in Scotland in the initial stages who may have some effect if matters do escalate in that part of the world. Well, just on this rights-based approach, I know it's an area that you are particularly focused upon, just striking that balance that Tom and I have described.
Yes, thanks, Chief, and Tom. I know you're closely involved through your membership of the International Development Board as well. I suppose just a couple of brief comments of reinforcement and detail on what the Chief just outlined. There's been a significant and a growing appetite to engage with Police Scotland internationally as a result of how we've policed the pandemic, how we've policed Black Lives Matters protests, how we've engaged with large-scale protests, whether it's environmental, how we policed COP26. And as the Chief alluded to, I think we have a form of policing in Scotland here to be proud of. It's values-based, it's got an unambiguous and consistent respect for human rights. And how do we manage that conflict, which is at the heart of your question? I think we do that in a couple of different ways. Firstly, that we do feel a strong sense of almost like a sort of corporate social responsibility to push that and advocate for that type of policing out. Again, it's about us and Scotland acting as a responsible global citizen. And there is a very significant appetite to engage with in that respect. But the other side of that actually is balance, and that's where governance comes in, as well as the Chief alluded to at the end of his comments, and actually having strong governance. And there are a significant number of checks and balances before we would deploy overseas. The most recent of which we have spent a significant amount of time on jointly with the SPA is around those governance responsibilities, to how the SPA discharges its statutory role in this space under Section 15 and Section 86 of our Enabling Act, the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act. And as you know, we've now come up with a protocol that actually is supportive when it needs to be, but also very challenging, and means that we have to create a significant piece of work that actually talks about, the public confidence, the significant risk, the human rights factors, and any proposed bit of work that we might do work. We may wish to potentially work overseas and have that discussion with the SPA and with a range of others, including the Scottish Government, before we actually decide to do the deployment. So it's right and proper that there should be onerous and detailed governance in this space, because the risks are significant as well. But I suppose my final point is, as well as how we manage the risks through mature, detailed governance, the opportunities in this space are massive for all the reasons that the Chief talked about at the beginning. We have a style and a type of policing in Scotland to be deeply, deeply proud of. There's an awful lot of people who want to engage with us and find out more about that and to learn from us. We also provide, we also have the opportunities to learn from police services internationally as well. And what we lacked a couple of years ago was a structure to do that in a thoughtful, consistent, engaged way, and we now have those structures through the International Development Academy and the associated governance processes to make sure that nobody is surprised in advance of any of our potential deployment opportunities. So, thank you.
Thank you. Tom, you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks very much to both of you for that update. I am aware that Scotland over many years has been strong at deploying officers out with the local force area to support that capacity building, etc., and building that role. And it's becoming more strategically important at this time. And these structures of giving that scrutiny and governance to safeguard their values and our rights-based approach are going to be really crucial to support our conscious awareness of the deployments. And I'm not talking about operational deployments and responding to investigation, etc., which will always happen and always have happened. These are about deployments out with the force area. Would it be possible to have a report to us telling us the numbers, the place, and a short summary of the purpose of those deployments, to give a sense of scale of officers that are deployed out with Scotland in support of the purpose of Police Scotland?
Well, the short answer is yes, we can. I mean, that's information, is brought to the International Development Board, but we're more than happy that can be shared through yourself, Tom, and the rest of the board.
Thank you very much. No question from you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that issue of cross-jurisdictional learning, again, is a close heart of improvement, and I'm absolutely delighted with that commitment. And one of the issues that will be coming up closer to home, but cross-jurisdictional, is the Police Foundation's imminent report on strategic review of policing in England and Wales, where they've been, and at our invitation to Scotland, to learn about police reform in Scotland. And in the United Kingdom, as Will Kerr knows, there's only two areas which have had significant police reform: Northern Ireland and Scotland, and so they have sought to learn. So on that basis, my question to the Chief Constable really is about serious and organised crime, which is mentioned regularly in your report. I have the advantage of knowing the impact that single police service has on being more effective against this area of crime, and also the cooperation between agencies in Gartcosh and elsewhere. I wonder if you say, just to remind us a little bit more about that cooperation and give us your view about your impact on serious and organised crime since you became a single police service. And maybe you could give some consideration how you might give that more visibility to the newer members of board and in the public domain at a board meeting at some stage in the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Well, first, I really welcome that opportunity, and we'll probably ask DCC Graham to lead that in terms of an outline of the approach to serious and organised crime in Scotland. The first thing I would say is that policing has a really important part to play in it, but we don't play that part alone. Part of the serious and organised crime strategy, part of the work of the serious and organised crime task force that is ministerially chaired, is to look across all elements of combating serious and organised crime, from disrupt to detect, to divert, to deter. And all of those different areas have a contribution to be made, whether that's into the other parts of the public sector, into relationships with the private sector through Scottish Crime Resilience, Scottish Business Resilience Centre, and the development of work internationally that we've heard to as well. When you do look at Gartcosh, and it's been mentioned a number of times and it does come up, it really is quite a significant and, in my view, a very impressive operating mechanism. And although it's a building, it's actually what it represents as a way of working more than anything else. I think there are almost 20 separate organisations now represented at Gartcosh, and they all have a United Kingdom and at times international reach. And that allows that shared working, shared tasking, a shared understanding of what the problem is, particularly as the world becomes more global. I do think the creation of Police Scotland has been a really significant enabler of that single sense of the challenge, of getting consistency, of getting a clear understanding of the impact in local communities. Because the impact of serious and organised crime, just like a terrorism attack or a murder, doesn't take place in CID offices or doesn't take place in Gartcosh. It takes place in people's communities. It takes place at a very localised level, and the impact can be enormous. So the murder of Kenny Riley that was linked to serious and organised crime, the ability of policing to detect that, to hold offenders to justice, underpins and underlines our legitimacy. And operating as a single service, I think, has really driven policing in Scotland into a place that other people look at. If you do look at Sir Michael Barber's work, I think he summarised some of the challenges have been around capacity, capability, and some organisational blockers. Now, we in Scotland have some journey to go. We discuss them every time we meet. We discuss them at all our SPA committees. I discuss them every morning, and we look at change, we look at development, we look at our values, we look at challenges in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. But we know structurally, as I've stressed today, that operating as a single service allows us to provide the right services to the right people right across Scotland, and it also allows us, we're far easier to deal with internationally as well, because there's a single point of entry and exit for international colleagues and for other strategic partners. So I am absolutely convinced that operating as a single service has placed Scotland in a good place. As I alluded to in my report, if you say, is Scotland in a safer place now than it would have been had we not gone through this change of structure and reform? And we know it's been difficult. We know we didn't get everything right. I'm convinced the answer to that is absolutely, it is safer. It's been the right thing to do. We know we've got a collective challenge to continue to build the police service of Scotland into the service we want it to become. But I do think we've got a very strong foundation, and our ability to tackle serious and organised crime has been enhanced by operating as a single service. But I will ask DCC Graham to take on the challenge you gave us, Chair, and whether at the next board or a further board later in the year, we will bring back a more detailed paper on our approach to tackling serious and organised crime and our contribution working with partners right across the board to make sure that we keep this country safe. Thank you.
That's very welcome, and thank you for making that commitment. And maybe if when DCC Graham does that, he could also try to address this issue about having a wider and more open discussion, because whilst it's very welcome, the board, we're quite privileged. We have been, many of us, to Gartcosh, seen it. So it'd be quite useful to think about how we might explain that extraordinary cooperation and co-location there in a wider context and the impact it has. So the board is very welcome. We'll, in your own time, we'd like a discussion on that, but also within that, we'd like how maybe we could open that up to a more transparent and open discussion about your approach to serious and organised crime, because you tend to mention it in almost all your reports and your successes in dealing with it, and sometimes by talking about it, you raise the concern that it is maybe less tackled than it is. So let's try and attempt that together. I'm very impressed myself with the impact you're having as a single police service and the extraordinary effectiveness of the cooperation between co-located agencies in Gartcosh. But I would like more people to know about that, and more people to be able to question you, if they could, about your effectiveness on that. So thank you for that, and thank you for your very comprehensive report and all your answers. They're always very welcome, and thank you for being so open with us, which I again always welcome. I don't think I've got any more board members. Any questions to you, Chief Constable? Just checking there. So thank you very much, Chief Constable. Very, very good to hear from you. Can I move on to item 6, which is the SPA Chief Executive's report submitted by Barry Sillars. Thank you. Acting Chief Executive Sillars, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. For the sake of brevity, I shall take the paper as read, but I would like very briefly just to thank the members for both the insight and advice they've given to staff in the development of principally the governance framework review and also the business plan. And I shall stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Do I have any questions from members about that written report? No? Fiona, thank you.
Apologies, just a short question, I think, Barry. In terms of looking at the use of technology, I thought it was interesting to see, and I think it's important that we continue to find out what the public's view is. And I thought under paragraph 6.2, it was interesting the significant report for the use of technology, suspected criminal movement, abusive interactions in social media, and tracing missing people had the highest support. 73% to support new technologies for policing of large crowds. 73% still not an unreasonable number, but I'm wondering if I'm making the wrong assumption about we'd quite like technology to be used when we think it's used for other people, but not for ourselves. I don't know if there's sufficient information in the poll to comment on that.
Well, I think very good question, Fiona, and I think that our approach at the SPA, so this is one piece of evidence. If you look on our website, we've also referenced recently the Scottish Household Survey. We do our own polling, and we also support and take assurance from Police Scotland's Your Police. And I don't know if you had the opportunity. If not, we've recorded it. We had a 5-hour kind of roundtable seminar on the use of
yes,
technology,
it did, thanks, yeah.
Which was a really great event, with people from all around the world. So I wouldn't draw an enormous conclusion from one single report. What we're trying to present is that kind of broad spectrum of hearing the views and taking the opinions of a multiple number of sources, and then try and triangulate and play back to members in Police Scotland Force Executive what that picture looks like. So I think what I'm taking from that piece of work, which started as an England and Wales piece of work through an organisation called Nesta, which we then tried to pick up, because our question was, if that's England and Wales, does it look different in Scotland or is it the same? And actually the conclusion is then, as you'll see, there's a real positivity. Our focus is policing, but if you read the report, it goes wider into technology across the public sector. So I take some assurance from it being very positive, and not necessarily negative. I would be more worried if it had come back to tell us that there was a societal, mistrust of that use of technology. But again, I think the point you make is exactly the right one. The circumstances of the individual and their level of threat, harm, or experience will shape their opinion on any individual technology. And what we're trying to do through the MOU and this kind of wider public debate is to map and understand all of those different positions. So I think the reports we do gather or reflect on the website give us a more rounded picture, but there's no single kind of golden nugget, and I don't think this is one. This is just one of the sources that we have got, and I think it's a very good piece of work. It's also just to continue for a second. It's also part of an ongoing piece of work which is called Understanding Scotland, which one of our partners deliver, and we'll continue to be engaged in that. So you'll see further reports as time goes on.
Okay, thanks very much, Barry. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Just from my point, Fiona, for your question, the general fault line from the evidence is this: is through the whole COVID period and beyond of polling, is that people are broadly in favour of enforcement technologies, and they're broadly against surveillance technologies. And that kind of goes to some way to answer your question: is that there's a fairness about enforcement, and people feel there's an unfairness about general surveillance. And I think that's a dilemma for policing and the police authority, because part of that is how tolerant are people when there's a failure to survey and if some serious outcome occurs because you haven't had surveillance. And that's not for us to answer. That's a public policy question, which we will get more advice. But the main thing that I would just take from this Chief Executive's report is we're looking for assurance and evidence. And that is often quite complex, but that adds to the quality of our debate. So, and thank you for the team for pursuing those reports. And it was a very good technology discussion, I must say. Congratulations to the staff who arranged that. Are there any other questions? Jane, you had your hand up, no?
I did. It was simply just to comment on the development of the business report and to reinforce what Barry had said, because I've had some citing of this. And the board have seen one possible draft, but it's been a very inclusive process, and I think the board would be pleased with what comes to us, is reported to us, promised at the next board meeting. It's realistic but stretching. It includes commitments to things like best value and the ICVS, which have not perhaps been in previous business plans. So I just commend the work that's been done.
Thank you, and thank you on behalf of the whole board as well, Barry, and your team for the work on these things. Sometimes these go under noted at board level, so just want to reinforce thank you for all the work. We look forward to seeing it, discussing it, I think, from what Jane says, in more detail at our next board meeting.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions for Acting Chief Executive Sillars, can I move on to our next item, item 7? It's a report submitted by Fiona Douglas, who's Director of Forensic Services. Thank you very much. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So taking the report as read, I will highlight a number of areas within my report to bring them to the attention of the authority. So this has been a very challenging period for forensic services with regards to starting a wholesale consultation process with all staff within the organisation with regards to changing the forensic services operating model in the future. So the consultation process started back in November, and it was pleasing that 90% of staff within the organisation had a face-to-face, albeit virtual, briefing from members of the senior management team at that time on the proposals for the new operating model for forensic services and the benefits that we hope that will bring both to staff working within the organisation, but also to the services that we provide to our justice partners. Since then, 95% of individual consultation meetings have happened, allowing staff an opportunity to discuss what those proposals mean to them individually. And that has also been supplemented by a range of staff engagement sessions, explaining the proposals in detail and allowing colleagues to ask questions and gain clarification on any areas that they choose to. We are in the process of consultation, and as such, we're looking to improve those proposals further as we go through that process. And we have a number of ideas that have been provided from our staff members as to how we can make those proposed changes even better in the future. So those are in the process of being reviewed, and we will have the opportunity to take a final recommendation to the Forensic Services Committee in the April meeting. Alongside the detailed consultation process, very pleased to have support from colleagues within Police Scotland in our programme management office and supporting our change activity across the organisation. And we now have a full programme office function supporting all of that change activity, and in particular working with colleagues to support other projects of change, which I'll come on to talk about in relation to post-mortem toxicology. Over this period, we've been working closely with colleagues across the justice sector, and particularly with Police Scotland with regards to forensic services support around drug spiking cases. As Mr. Halpin referred to in the Forensic Services Committee report, we had detailed conversations within the Forensic Services Committee with regards to forensic services toxicology support to the spiking cases in particular. So Forensic Services continues to work closely with colleagues to make sure that those cases are prioritised and dealt with as soon as they are received into the organisation. They are complex in terms of the analytical support that's required to provide the results in those types of investigation, but we continue to provide those results as and when required for the cases that we are working on within Forensic Services. Within toxicology, another key area where we have some challenge is around drugs driving analysis, and the demand for drugs driving toxicology services continues to be significantly higher than anticipated. And we're working with colleagues within Police Scotland and the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service and Scottish Government to look at a more sustainable model for the delivery of toxicology support around drugs driving analysis in the future. The project to transfer post-mortem toxicology services from Glasgow University, where it's currently undertaken, to Forensic Services continues to work at pace and is on target for the transition of that service to Forensic Services from the 1st of December of this year. And really, in concluding my comments, I'd like to add to those made by the Chief Constable in relation to the improvised explosive device discovered in Princes Street Gardens in Edinburgh in January of 2018. Forensic Services was able to provide key scientific support to the large-scale police investigation led by the Counter-Terrorism Unit in Police Scotland through the use of detailed search and recovery techniques and DNA technology, resulting in the identification of the suspect's DNA within the device, who later pled guilty and was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment last week. This really shows how Forensic Services uses our excellent scientific support to support our justice partners to keep communities in Scotland safe and protected. I'm happy to take any questions on any part of my report.
Thank you very much for your report. I do intend to ask you to report to us every quarter at board level so that we can have visibility of the work you're doing, as well as having the assurance through the critical role that the Tom Halpin and his committee play in more detailed oversight. So I'm going to take the questions in the order that I have in front of me, which is firstly Katrina Stewart.
Thank you. Good morning, and thanks very much for your report. I've probably mentioned this before, but I did really enjoy a trip to the forensic building some months ago. It was absolutely fascinating, really, really kind of enlightening. I think my big question really for you is really around the drug driving analysis section and the concerns around lack of resourcing to that, because this is obviously a huge issue in terms of public safety and public concerns. So I really wondered, I just wondered if you could say a bit more about how that shortfall is going to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and I think it is an important area where the toxicology services are critical to keeping our roads and our communities safe. So we are working very closely with colleagues in Police Scotland and COPFS to develop a model that takes into account how the legislation's currently implemented, which results in the existing demand, but also looking at how Police Scotland in particular would implement that legislation in the future, and then what the demand for those services could be. I think it's fair to say that collectively, as the legislation was implemented in Scotland, there's been a lot of learning, both here and south of the border, as the legislation was also introduced in England and Wales earlier. And I think a number of the assumptions upon which the capacity that was built have proven to be an underestimate of the actual demand for the toxicology provision. And I think we have done a lot of work to have a much more robust understanding of what the actual demand is currently and also could be in the future once the implementation of the legislation is complete. So we have a number of options that have been developed in terms of what that sustainable model for toxicology provision could look like. And there are a number of different ways that we can improve the existing capacity, but a wholesale change to build what could be required will require investment, and we're in discussion with colleagues in Scottish Government with regards to that.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. I mean, one of the things that was really I was made aware of during that visit was just how rapidly changing, how sophisticated the manufacturers are in terms of how they can keep almost getting one step ahead of legislation, and I can see that that's a big thing that needs to be tackled. So thanks for that assurance, Fiona. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair Hay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona. Really, like Katrina, I enjoyed my visit to Forensic Services, excuse me, and found it extremely helpful. And also this report, it's really good to get cited on some of the major changes that are impacting on Forensic Services. So my question is really, first of all, a comment, and I really welcome the high level of staff engagement that is currently taking place in relation to developing this new operating model for Forensic Services. I think that's bringing the staff along and listening to their views. You cannot overstate how important that is going forward. But what would be helpful is, in terms of the new operating model, what are the major benefits that you're seeking to achieve within Forensic Services by bringing this about?
Thank you for that question. So there are a number of benefits that we see the transformed operating model for Forensic Services delivering. I would say the most fundamental of those for our colleagues within Police Scotland is to really transform how we support investigative crime, and particularly investigative crime that falls into that sort of less serious category around particularly acquisitive crime, where at the moment there can be delays in the provision of forensic intelligence as a result of high caseloads across the organisation. So what the new operating model will allow is for a transformed forensic service support to local policing in particular, in terms of much faster provision of forensic intelligence. And as a result of that, we would expect to support colleagues within Police Scotland, particularly around acquisitive crime detection. In addition to transforming the local policing services, we want to build upon the serious and organised crime support that we provide to justice partners to make sure that we continue to provide an excellent service in those areas, but also build upon how we can improve our support, particularly to the courts and around the service provision for victims of sexual violence, and in making sure that we can offer offer as much support as we can to support the justice process up for victims of crime. In addition, from an internal staffing perspective, our staff have given us many ideas through the work that we've done over the last 3 years about how they would like to change the culture of the organisation and also how we support the health, safety and well-being of our people. And there are a number of changes within the new operating model with regards to how we can support our staff better, given the very difficult job that they do, and in particular to support their mental health and well-being with regards to exposure to traumatic incidents. So there's a range of measures within the new operating model that are really targeted to improve that, as well as making sure that we're a cost-effective organisation and focused on the performance and the services which we provide.
Thank you. Alistair, come back.
Yeah, I really appreciate Fiona highlighting what these benefits will be. I know it's considerable change and a lot of work is going into it, but I feel it's important that we collectively understand what the intended benefits will be, and I look forward to this work progressing going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. And I reinforce that. I think the focus on the public interest benefits of change is primarily an interest that the board has. But we also are very aware of the benefits to the service providers, your staff, in terms of trauma and the concerns that they may have. But if we can express the change in terms of victim focused, in terms of clear up, detection, prosecution, and particularly I think you mentioned, I think they're high volume crimes. Is that what you're, can you just before we move on, just explain what you mean by that? What kind of crimes are you hoping to be better able to resolve, solve, detect and prosecute through your service? What type of crimes are you saying?
I think that I would highlight acquisitive crime or group 3 crime in particular, and by that I would refer to crimes such as housebreaking, car thefts, etc. So they are quite high in volume, hence why we would refer to them as volume crime, and they would be the type of crime that members of the public would be more likely to experience, thankfully, than the serious and major incidents, which a large part of our current service is targeted at delivering. We can provide a much improved service to the public through that increased support to colleagues in local policing within Police Scotland to provide a faster response to perhaps a vulnerable householder who wants to secure their property and requires forensic evidence to be captured, to make sure that an individual whose car has been stolen can get possession back of their vehicle and it doesn't impact on their day-to-day life as a result of delays in the recovery again of forensic evidence. And then it's about the whole journey of the forensic science. We talk about our crime scene to court model and we're very proud of that. And one of the real benefits which the new operating will deliver is joining that up far better so that we are seeing that speed run through the whole forensic process and that we can provide those intelligence results back to colleagues in Police Scotland as quickly as we can to allow them then to act on that forensic intelligence.
Thank you, Fiona. The next question is from Katharina Casper. Katharina.
Yeah, thank you very much. Similarly to my board colleagues, I also enjoyed my visit to Gartcosh, so thank you for that and thank you for the good report. I would just really like to welcome the amount of change that is happening, and it's really reassuring to hear that you are fully staffed from a change management perspective, because this is one of those concerns I think that we have been expressing in the past. My substantive question was very similar to that of Katrina. But I actually just wanted to expand on this just a little bit, because obviously you have given us assurances that you have thought of ways to address the drug driving bottleneck, so to say, and there are a few options that are being investigated. I just kind of wanted to seek some additional assurance that you have, and I'm sure you have, but you factored into your analysis the fact that there will be a substantial backlog that obviously keeps growing. The longer it takes to find a more sustainable model, the larger is the backlog of cases that need to be processed. You know, and I obviously draw parallels there with the National Health Service, where we've got waiting times and waiting list initiatives, etc. So there may be some intervention required to almost kind of level and bring us into a sustainable position. So that's one element. And the second element, actually, it was your comment that triggered the thought as well around the fact that maybe when the legislation was introduced, it wasn't quite, the impact on forensic services possibly wasn't fully understood, or really by nobody. And that just makes me question, in terms of the new operating model, what has been built in terms of flex. Should there be future changes in legislation that are kind of coming down? And if you are considering, if you are considering as part of your horizon scanning as to whether or not there will be something that'll be coming further down, just to make sure that the new operating model has got some degree of flex and we don't kind of end up in a similar position again. So apologies for sort of slightly convoluted question, but I would just be really keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you for the question. I'll try and take it from start to end. So what I would say around the existing caseload that we have around the drugs driving samples is that yes, the short-term options are part of that parcel of measures that are being considered around the sustainable model for the provision of a drugs driving toxicology service. It's important that we work closely with colleagues within Police Scotland and the Crown Office to make sure that we are looking for those short-term solutions to deal with the backlog of samples that we have, and that also includes working with service providers in England to look at how we can outsource some of those cases in the intervening period, so that we are managing that increased demand for our services through that period before we have the full model in place. I think it's a really insightful question with regards to some of the assumptions made when the service was built within forensic services as the legislation was being developed. And there was a lot of learning that was taken from England and Wales with regards to what the anticipated levels of demand would be. And I think it's fair to say that within England and Wales, that was wholly underestimated, as well as here in Scotland. So we are working off, if you like, an assumption that the levels of drugs driving within Scotland and the wider UK would be lower than they actually have proven to be. So that is a point of learning, and that we now have a better demand forecast for what drugs driving capacity should be within forensic services moving forward. I think you draw a really excellent link across into then some of the assumptions that sit beneath the planning for the new operating model. And what I would say to provide reassurance is the key tenet of the operating model is increased flexibility and responsiveness, so that we can flex our capacity far better across traditional forensic disciplines such as biology and chemistry, for example. There's lots of general skills that sit across those traditional disciplines, and the new model really looks at how do we bring those activities together so that we are more efficient, but as importantly, we can flex our people as and where they're required to be able to complement local policing priorities or major crime investigations, so that we can provide that forensic support and that we can flex far better than we can at this particular moment. The other area that we're also developing is looking at more of a demand forecasting process, and through our strategic workforce planning piece is to be able to make more proactive decisions around building capacity in and around how different crime trends are happening, and taking intelligence from colleagues within Police Scotland and other partners so that we can start to make sure that we're preparing ourselves for the future. And I do believe our new operating model will provide that flexibility for us to be able to adapt to those changes far better than we can at this particular moment.
That is quite reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just going to ask firstly if DCC Graham had any comment to make, because I know you work closely with forensic services, and then give the final word to Tom Halpin after that. So I don't know if you want to say anything, DCC Graham.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a couple of brief comments in relation to what's been said. I think, firstly, I really welcome the close and effective working that's continued, which is the only way of achieving the ends that have been described in the Scottish Police Authority's statutory duty in supplying forensic services to Police Scotland and others. And I also welcome the acknowledgement that the capacity in some key areas is not yet what is required, but the plans and proposals that we're developing jointly with that necessary investment will give us options, and the Scottish Police Authority will have a key role in determining and securing that additional investment that we require in the system to meet those capacity gaps. And we also hope that through that work we jointly better understand challenges and demands better than we ever had before, and I hope that the board agrees that it's important and relevant to hear the views and the evidence from Police Scotland if we're going to speak about, exactly as you've done, a focus into victim experience, public confidence, improved outcomes. Then we can only do that when we look at the whole system, and often Police Scotland is at the start and the middle and the end of that journey as we work with forensic services. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your observations. I completely agree that a focus on the public interest, a forensic focus on the public interest over change for the board is absolutely essential. There's all sorts of additional benefits, which in many ways drive that public interest focus, but only if we can explain why change actually will make life better, make people feel safer, make people actually safer indeed, and reduce and prevent crime. That would be our role, I think, on the board. But we have a great committee looking at much more detail than we're ever able to do this at board level, who is chaired by Tom Halpin. Tom, I wonder if you've got any comment on what you've heard or what Fiona or or Malcolm have said.
Chair, it's probably more a reflection, and just to pay tribute to other board members who are members of that committee as well. It's clear from Director Fiona's report today, it's a complex area of business, and it's data driven as well, because you would expect in science. And to hear DCC Graham talking about the collaboration is very comforting. But it's in the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service are key stakeholders in this too. So it's complex in who the key partners are. We've got the work ongoing about maximising their efficiency and effectiveness. You've heard today about the successful identification of very dangerous people through DNA, and not just in counter-terrorism, but in serious and organised crime. And there's a real focus from Forensic Services and Police Scotland around making sure that the timeliness in dealing with volume crime, which really is most likely to impact on citizens, is really given the priority it needs. And we do estimate there's ability to drive up detections by some percentage points, simply by timeliness, preventing people who are committing volume crimes from going on to commit other crimes as that crime's under detection. That's apparent to everyone. What I would say for forensic services is that they are the recipients of demand. They don't create the demand generally. And that, for instance, and DCC Graham talked about it, in estimating what the future demand from drug driving is one issue would be. Forensic Services could only go with information that was being provided through enforcement elsewhere, and Police Scotland were fully involved in that. And what it throws up is a societal issue, where drug driving is much more prevalent than we understood once we start actually testing like that, and we have to build it up. But one area that we are focused on and working with Police Scotland and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, and has been subject of a recommendation from HMICS going back some time, is to establish a revised memorandum of understanding of what service should be expected from forensic services. They have a finite amount of resources. It's not going out in a commercial sense and we've got more money by it. It's how do we maximise capacity we can provide through the resources that are available, and that meets the priorities that we're talking about. So the committee in the short term are absolutely focusing delivering this memorandum of understanding, which is not a barrier to what demand can be placed on it. It's about understanding demand and the expectation of how we prioritise and how we escalate issues that perhaps need more resources. So that area of the memorandum of understanding, the board will hear more of as that progresses, but that is critically important.
Thank you, Tom. Just remind us all on the board, who's that memorandum between, and what timescale do you expect it to be finalised and come to the board, or be cited on?
So I'm sure Fiona, as director, who's been deeply involved, could give more information to me, but it fundamentally is between SP's Forensic Services, Police Scotland and the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service, and there is another stakeholder in PIRC who receives services as well. And it's in quite an advanced draft stage, and waiting for concurrence from our key partners that they can actually meet the requirements of them as well. So it should be delivered in more a shorter term than longer term.
Thank you very much. I don't think you want to add anything to that, Fiona, before we move on.
I think that was an excellent summary. I think just building on the timescales wise, and there has been a substantial amount of work that's been completed on that, and that document needs to go through governance processes within all of the key partners subject to that memorandum of understanding, and we're just about to take that through those internal governance routes.
Thank you very much. The Chief Constable mentioned capacity and the capacity challenge of policing. There's clearly a capacity challenge in forensics too, and you can only resolve that by driving efficiency and effectiveness at managerial level, and actually looking for additional resources if that actually doesn't deliver the outcome. And the outcome, I just repeat this, the outcome of the public interest outcomes. So how to make people feel safer, be safer, and prevent crime. So maybe that's at some future stage. We'll come back to that prevention agenda and your role and your services' role in prevention of crime, because I know that I've discussed that in detail, and we've all have with DCC Graham about cybercrime. We can't police our way out of certain crimes. We can try to detect as many as we can, but they're pretty overwhelming in numbers. And so maybe we'll come back through the Forensic Services Committee and say, just have a stronger look at the role of prevention of your very significant scientific resource and staffing resource. And I know you already play a role there, but maybe we could just ventilate it more at board level. So if there are no other questions on that, thank you very much, and I look forward to the next quarter's report from you. Agenda item 8 is the internal audit report, and it's over to Acting Chief Executive Sillars. Barry.
Thanks very much, Chair. Again, I'll take the paper as read, but as it's here for board approval, I'll just pick out, with your permission, 4 kind of key points. First of which is the range of activity and the kind of range of assurances that the programme will provide. So there's a diagram on page 3 which tries to encapsulate this and is effectively a subliminal celebration of Scottish curling, if you sat up and watched it. But that describes our 4 key themes, which are compliance, efficiency and effectiveness, learning, and all of which underpin preparedness. The second point I'd like to make is the fact that we've tried to strike a balance between Police Scotland activity and Forensic Services activity. Thirdly, there's a coordination input which you don't see. However, there's a lot of work goes on in the background to decouple and to coordinate between our own commissioned activities, that of HMICS, where they're in the final stages of their draft 3-year inspection plan, and also Audit Scotland are in that conversation. So it is coordinated across this system. And then finally, as the Vice Chair pointed out earlier in the meeting, this comes through the ARAC with their recommendation for approval. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Inviting Jane Ryder, Chair of ARAC, our audit committee. Any comment to add to that?
Not to add, I would just reinforce, if I could, the scope of the coverage and the balance that it aims to strike, that it was a robust process of development, including HMICS and Audit Scotland, and that was acknowledged in the meeting at which we were considering it. And indeed, the timing is such that Audit Scotland should be able to rely on at least one or two of these internal audit reports, which is also an improvement. The sufficient flexibility to accommodate the unexpected and the unanticipated, which I think is an important aspect of this. And so the committee were unanimous in recommending it to the board.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the development of this. This is a critical part of our public assurance. I think it's 500 days a year, is that right, Jane, that we have a professional assurance audit? And so we had to be judicious in how we allocate that, and so this is a recommendation to you. I had noticed, Caroline Stewart, that you wanted to ask a question, but I don't see your hand up. Are you there, Caroline?
I am, Chair, I am. And to be honest, I was going to ask a question, but then Grant covered it when he was covering the committee chairs, because it was around the benefits realisation, and that new report's going to come to us at the start of the new financial year. So I think we covered that off then, because that was a last year's audit that was happened, which was a great audit, and it's kind of pointed the way for this new report coming to us in May.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before I ask you to approve? I'm asking you to approve to just, are we approving it or discussing it? I think we're approving it, are we? I see nods. Which am I doing?
We're inviting you to approve it, please, Board.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you to approve that report? Thank you very much indeed. Our final item on public session is the financial performance quarter, the third quarter. I'm going to ask James Gray to present this report to us. James, thank you very much. Chief Financial Officer, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be fairly brief because this report was spoken about at length at the Resources Committee earlier this month. But a few things I would like to pull out, starting with revenue. So there's two elements to our revenue budget this year, two large elements. One is the business as usual budget, and the other is the additional funding that was provided for COVID. With regards to the business as usual budget, there's been a good amount of stability throughout the financial year and throughout the year. And here today, we are forecasting that we will be on budget for the financial year end. With regards to COVID, £15 million of additional funding was made available for this year based on the budget that was presented to the board last March. And that was based on our estimates around where we thought we would be with loss of income, additional PPE costs and additional overtime costs and other related COVID costs. When we got to quarter two and we reported to the board at the end of the last calendar year, our forecast at that point was that we wouldn't require the full £15 million. And that was because we had seen a quicker than anticipated recovery in income, and we were seeing a slower usage of PPE. So at that point, we were reporting to the board that we thought there would be a £6.2 million underspend against that £15 million COVID budget. But since then, obviously, we've had the new variant, Omicron, and what we've seen is a slight reduction in forecast income as a result of things like sporting matches going behind closed doors for a period of time in January. We've seen additional overtime costs, and there's been annual leave cancelled as a result of pressures on staff absences and requiring people to cancel leave to come in. So what that has meant is that the forecast that we're presenting here today is that we will now need that full £15 million of COVID funding that was in the original budget. But what's happened since quarter two is that when we reported that we would have a 6.2 million underspend on that budget, Scottish Government made an adjustment through the spring budget revision to remove the £6.2 million. Now, since then, we've obviously been in discussion with government because, you know, this was money that was allocated for COVID, and we have, as a result of the new variant, seen additional costs that were unforeseen at quarter two. And through those discussions, Scottish Government has agreed to make an adjustment to our final BAM letter, which is our budgeting and monitoring letter, which will provide that £6.2 million of funding, so that we will end the financial year in a break-even position. So it's a bit of a circuitous route to get there, in that we had forecast we wouldn't need all the money back in the autumn, but we do subsequently do all that COVID money as a result of Omicron, and Scottish Government will provide that, so we will end the year with a balanced budget position. With regards to capital, at Q3 we have spent £25.9 million, and we have about £30 million to spend in the final quarter, so a similar position that we've been into previous financial years, in that the capital budget is again backloaded. That budget is being monitored on a daily basis now around where the spend is through the cycle of governance and into procurement and into delivery dates. And we are confident that, as in previous years, we will spend the full allocation. That said, we are trying to break out of this annual cycle of backloaded capital spend. And when the budget report comes forward next month, we will set out some proposals as to what we would seek to do to try and break out of that cycle by looking to take a more of a multi-year approach to capital spending. And finally, on reform, our forecast remains the same as it was at Q2, that we will spend £23.1 million, and we are on track to do that. But I'll pause there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just that, looking forward, James, to the budget discussions for next year, very grateful for the work of the Budget Oversight Group with the chairs of resources, people, and myself included, and then from your colleagues, the Chief Constable, Chief Officer Page, and yourself there. That's a very good place to discuss those more complex issues that you mentioned there about spending the capital over not having the annuality and the backloading. We'll leave that aside. We'll give that just my thanks to that Budget Oversight Group. This is an innovation this year, and I think it's proved itself, and we'll carry on next year. So firstly, thank you, and then over to Grant, and then open it up, and please feel free to ask any questions. And then if DCO Page would like to add any comment at any stage, very welcome. So firstly to Grant.
Thanks, Chair, and James, thank you very much for your report, and also the explanation about how we've dealt with you've dealt with the COVID funding, which I appreciate is extremely complicated for people who are not too familiar with it. I would also like to say how well presented the pack is in terms of pictorial representation in an easy to follow fashion, hopefully for non-accountants, in Appendix A. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about on the capital front, where you see particular challenges in monitoring things on a day-to-day basis. I know there's been an awful lot of publicity generally about difficulties with supply, and also challenges in the construction industry about materials and so on. So I just wondered if you could give the board some reassurance in terms of any particular plan Bs you have in mind to be able to land the final position in accordance with the full year allocation. Thank you.
Happy to pick that up. So I think the day-to-day monitoring has been effective and hasn't identified any issues to date. So we obviously have been acutely aware throughout this financial year that there have been the potential for supply chain issues, given that there's been international issues around things like microchips and other things that are components of goods that we would purchase. So we have kept a very close eye on that throughout the year, and we are not encountering any difficulty. And whilst the money hasn't been spent yet, in the sense that we can only recognise it when we've taken delivery, what we have done, and where we maybe are further ahead than where we've been in previous years, is actually in placing orders. So orders have been placed, delivery dates have been confirmed, suppliers have made commitments to deliver. So we have a good level of confidence around that at the moment. With regards to construction, that has been a challenge. What I would say is, if you were to look at the estates spend, for example, where you would see most of that construction work coming through, that we are actually in a far stronger position than we've been in previous years, where we've spent over £6 million within the first 3 quarters, and actually are only looking to spend a further 1.8 in quarter 4. So the run rate has been fairly consistent throughout the year. And then with regards to construction in the change environment, the main spend in that area has been in NEDIP, where there's been works done into Woodhill House and the construction of a new productions facility at Kitty Brewster, and that is now all completed. So that spend was still, there's still a bit around final billing to come through, but the work has been done. So I think the construction risk element has been dealt with this year, but that will continue to be a challenge next year for certain, and potentially into future years. But I think where we are at the moment is in a fairly good position. And we have a good visibility over dates for getting the goods in for the remainder of the financial year, albeit there is only about 5 to 6 weeks left. But if there are any issues, we will make sure that we flag them through to the SPA at the earliest opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much, James. That's very reassuring. And as you know, I'm a great supporter of the way forward in trying to actually get much more front-end expenditure each year and into a recurring on a basis of a 5-year plan. So very much welcome the steps forward that are being put in place now to help us avoid being in this situation as we've been in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair Hay.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, James. A very interesting and extremely helpful report, which has been greatly aided by your explanations as to why we are where we are at this moment in time. So just so that I'm clear, we're projecting a significant overspend at this moment in time, but through, as I think you phrased it, a circuitous route, because things are changing, you're actively managing it. What we are expecting at the end of the year is a break-even budget in terms of revenue.
Yeah, so I think where we are at the moment is just a timing issue, and that there had been 15 million allocated for COVID this year, and we will spend 15 million. But what had happened was between quarter 2 and quarter 3, Scottish Government had made an adjustment in their budget based on our forecast to take 6 million away, but that 6 million will come back. So what we've reported at quarter 3 is just a timing difference from the funding being taken away through the spring budget revision to it effectively coming back through the final budget allocation letter that we'll receive imminently. So yes, the short answer is we will end up with a break-even position. And if you compare it to where we were at the budget that was set back in April, we will be within that budget because we will have spent the £15 million of COVID funding that was approved in the original budget last April. It was just that we didn't think we were going to need it in the autumn, but subsequently where we are now, we do need it.
Yeah, and Chair, just to follow up on that, and the other significant area is staff being unable to take their leave and their rostered days off, etc. So you've now put a value onto that, and you're putting that through the financial forecast. And now that you've quantified that, obviously what we want is staff to have their leave, we want staff to have their rostered days. So how do we intend to manage this going forward, so this isn't a big variable for us in years to come?
So I can start that. The DCO may want to come in after me, but what I would say first of all is yes, we've had to account for untaken annual leave and rest days because that's an accounting requirement. So whilst it's a budget cost, it isn't an actual cash cost at this stage because we're not paying that out. You've reminded me of a point that I should have mentioned in my comments, which was that our forecast is in effect a worst case scenario, which is that annual leave that was cancelled over the Christmas period and into January, that none of that is recovered in over the next 5 or 6 weeks to the financial year end. If some of that is recovered, then that will improve the financial position, and that's why we, the BAM letter that we'll get will reflect what the actual final position is. But whilst that's accounted for in the books, the expectation would be that into the next financial year and beyond, that there would be the opportunity to run those accrued balances back down, but that will require active management of annual leave into the next financial year, and the same for rest days, which I know that the P&D department are looking to do.
Okay, and Chair,
go ahead.
Deputy Chief Constable want to comment on enabling staff to do that, to run those accrued balances down?
Yeah, happy to comment on that, Alistair. Thank you. The balances have run up because of COVID, effectively, and the level of sickness we've had. We've accounted for it properly. We'll wait and see what the actual numbers are towards the end of the year. From a people taking leave perspective, our position, Chief Constable's position, is very much that from a well-being people should take as much holiday as they're entitled to. So the message has gone out very firmly, down line management, both officers and staff, that they should use as much of their leave as they possibly can, and we will continue to kind of press that to try and recover the extremely hard working period they've had over the COVID period, but obviously the previous 18 months through COVID as well. So there's a big push on our side to try and make sure that people do take that leave, and we do manage the service accordingly. So yeah, it's very important to us that we get them to take their leave. So we are pushing at every level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just to conclude then, as the board all know, the authority's red line is to set a balanced budget for this year, which has been set, and a balanced budget for next year, which we have yet to set. We will set. That's our red line. What James has been explaining is the effective spend to the full budget. So that's expenditure, and I think he has given us an assurance that the spend will be effective spend will be to the full budget, and there'll be no overspend and there'll be no significant underspend. And I only say that, I can see James and David nodding. I only say that as a layperson, Grant, who is not an accountant. But then that's what you're telling us, yep. And I think that's very, very welcome. And given this is a £1.4 billion budget, I think that's pretty impressive to do that. So at some stage, we'll need to come back to this accrued expenditure and taking leave, because that could be a problem in the future of management of this. But we're going to leave that. At the moment, we're in a good place. Let me just ask for your confirmation about that, James. We're in a good place in that we're going to effectively spend, not just spend it, effectively spend. And you've got a strategy, which I know you've discussed with myself, Grant and Mary, about actually addressing the capital spend issue, which we'll hear more about. And at the moment, Grant and I and Mary are comfortable with what you're going to be saying. Well, I won't go into detail, but it's a multi-year approach to spending capital, which I think is sensible, because the annualities has caused, the assumption about annualities is caused underspends or quick spend in the last quarter. So without wishing to push my luck on this one, I think we are achieving full spend against the budget, but we are not forecasting any overspend of any significance or any overspend. Am I right? Yeah. Just want to make that clear. Sorry to be pedantic about that, but it is important with some of your presentation of figures that they are a timing issue, James, that they are not forecasted overspend. Is there anything else for our finance colleagues at all? Thank you very much for the report. What time? It's 20 past, just gone 20 past 12. Can I say that we come, sorry, Ian, Chief Constable, you've appeared again. Do you want to add something at the end of that?
No, I don't, Chair, sorry, I was just coming back on with the camera at the end of the meeting, so nothing further from me, thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say we're going to now go after this. We're going to have a break and then go into our private agenda items. So can I ask you to come back at 1:45? Quarter to one. Yep. Keep your systems going, but just close down your camera, please. Thank you very much, and thank you all, everybody, for their contributions and papers. As usual, very high standard. Thank you.
Thank you.